South Africa has received a $1 billion loan from the BRICS Bank. This equates to 14.5 billion rand. The loan will be used to support economic recovery in South Africa. Joining me now for more on this is the New Development Bank's Vice President, Leslie Maasdorp. Mr. Maasdorp, thank you very much for your time this afternoon and on a weekend at that. So $1 billion equates to about 14.5 billion rand. That's a lot of money, and there certainly is a lot we can use that money for to boost economic recovery. But it isn't the first loan we've got from the New Development Bank. We received an emergency loan of $1 billion last June. In South Africa, will we be able to meet the repayment terms of these two large amounts in such quick succession?
Thanks very much for having me, Anlie. You are absolutely correct. This is the second of the emergency COVID-related loans that we are providing to South Africa. In fact, just to give you a quick snapshot, we provided an overall program of $10 billion, $2 billion for each of the BRICS countries. So this final $1 billion to South Africa completes that program, as we have provided similar support to the other countries, to Russia, to India, to China, and so on. The first loan was mainly focused on the public health emergency. As you know, the pandemic sort of started around February, March in South Africa last year, and there was a huge strain on the health system. So the first loan was very much focused on providing the additional support, complementary support to the public health budgets, to support the acquisition of protective gear, ventilators, and so on, and to beef up public health expenditure. This loan, the second one, is much more focused on economic recovery, stimulating economic growth through employment creation. To come to your question, these are long-term loans. They are not being, the repayment period is 25 to 30 years. So the important thing about this loan, though, is that the New Development Bank, because it's a very highly rated financial institution, we are able to provide much lower rates of interest than what the government would get from any other source. For example, if the government raised debt through its own bond borrowing program. Because South Africa is sub-investment grade and we have a much higher credit rating, we can provide funding at a much lower cost. So the government absolutely have the ability to repay this $2 billion back to the New Development Bank.
Of the BRICS countries, Brazil and Russia and India have all been very heavily impacted by COVID. Does that weaken in any way the positioning of this BRICS Initiative Bank?
The BRICS countries overall have been heavily affected and impacted upon by the COVID-19. China is obviously fully recovered. I mean, I live here in Shanghai, where there are literally zero cases. Beijing, the large cities, there are zero local cases. The only few cases that you have in China are imported cases of people coming into the country. So we're largely living in a post-COVID world here in China. And the situation is very different in the other BRICS countries. I'd say the two most affected in the BRICS bloc right now would be Brazil, probably up there, number one, followed by India. Brazil, a couple of days ago, broke all records with over 6,000 deaths in one day. So it's a very tragic proportion of in the way in which the pandemic is affecting Brazil. India, the same. Russia has largely sort of controlled and contained the spread of the pandemic, but I think those two are the most affected countries. South Africa, as you know, has the economic impact is obviously quite devastating, and the country has suffered a massive economic contraction. But from a health perspective, in terms of the double-digit numbers of deaths right now, it seems that it's broadly sort of contained. Our measures is really to support the existing programs and initiatives that the governments have in place. By no means are we the principal sort of drivers of the solution. We are just supporting the initiatives that government has embarked on to control this pandemic.
So the bank says the money is going to be directed largely at job creation stimulus packages. If spent wisely, and that's the very important caveat. If spent wisely, what kind of direct impact can we see on South Africa's economic recovery in the coming years?
I mean, as you know, the South African economy has been heavily impacted by this pandemic. Firstly, massive contraction in economic growth, which means a huge drop in tax revenues. So the impact is very direct. There's been massive job losses in the economy, especially small and micro and medium enterprises. So the loan is correctly aimed at creating job opportunities. And I say job opportunities because these are not long-term sustainable jobs, Anlie. In many respects, you have to define it as job opportunities. So the president announced, or the government announced, the presidential economic stimulus, employment stimulus program. This funding will go towards the first phase of funding that program, which is aimed at creating up to 700,000 job opportunities in South Africa, and also to provide social protection measures for people who have temporarily lost their jobs. It's very important to get people back in employment who have left the labor force because the impact, as you know, has been very severe on household and on small business in particular, who are the biggest employers, as you know, in the economy. So in terms of impact, that is where the impact is most felt.
Well, thank you very much for your time and for unpacking the purpose of this loan. That was Leslie Maasdorp, Vice President of the New Development Bank.